No? Good, good. Quick show of hands, who's had a play with Orchard Core CMS? Oh, quite a few of you, that's good. Good, okay. I haven't got many slides, just the two. A bit like Nick, but really just two. And what we're going to attempt within a short period of time, we're going to create this site here, or we're going to use this theme on Orchard Core CMS. So this is a WordPress theme, and before I go into this, this is not a best practice talk. Obviously Orchard Core is a relatively new technology, it's constantly changing. So what you see here now might not be here next week or the week after, so it might be totally different. And obviously this theme has been created by somebody that I don't know. It's going to have a lot of code in there that is probably targeting browsers that you don't really need to target anymore. A lot of probably additional markup in there that we don't need, but put that to one side for a second, and hopefully we'll just concentrate on the things that that we can do with Orchard Core. So just having a quick look at this site, we have a header section which is site-wide with a home link on the site name there. We have a menu which links to a page, as well as the home page is like a blog, sort of blog list. We also have a search which has this funky animation on it, and then each one of these is a blog post, and then we have some pagination at the bottom. We have search, we have a tag cloud, we have some categories and some recent posts. And if we go into one of these blog posts, we'll see that it's a slightly different layout. We have a header section here with the breadcrumb, and then the blog post content. So best thing to do is look at how we can componentize this theme. You know, look at what we need to content manage, what we don't want to be content managed, what can be reusable, and things like that. So this is just a screenshot I've just loaded into Photoshop, and as I said before, this section here is essentially our header. This appears across all pages, across blog posts, across non-blog posts, i.e. just standard pages, as well as the home page itself. Within there, obviously we have a section here which has the site name and also a strapline. Now at the moment there's nothing in Orchard Core CMS that allows us to have that strapline in there, so I've created a little module that allows us to do that, which I'll show you in a sec. Menu navigation here, which we do have, so we'll use a standard menu item for that. The search, and then each one of these blog posts here is essentially the summary view of a blog post, so we'll style that and use that. This also is a layout. If I just go back to the site, this has some funky masonry resizing reflow thing going on as well, so that's just a little bit of JavaScript that we'll add in. Scrolling down to the bottom, we have some pagination which goes here, which we can do. Search, which we have search, so we can use search for this, so that's fine. What we don't have is a tag cloud component or a widget of that, so what we'll do for that is just hard code that in for now, but it's pretty simple to add some logic in to change the size of the texts and things. Here again, we don't have taxonomies, so this would be a perfect place to use taxonomies, but we don't currently have that in the existing solution. That's on its way. And likewise with this, which we would use projections, we don't have projections yet, so we'll just create a little HTML widget to put in there. And things like this, we can use additional menus, so that's how we'll solve that for now. On the post page, we have again something slightly different. Oops. We have this section here, and we'll create a little zone for that because we'll need to inject into that from different sort of content items. And we'll have a breadcrumb which we'll stick in. Again, we don't have a breadcrumb component, but it'll give you an idea of how that would work. We have the main body of the post, so that's fine. We have all of that currently in the system. We'll reuse the menu component to create that. Again, we don't have projections, but it's a different way of showing you how that could work. And we don't have comments or anything like that, so we'll just ignore that for now. So, going into the project. So this is a base project that I've just installed, taken from master on GitHub. And what I've done is created a theme, and I've called it Harvest Theme. And to do that, you would just create a new project, and it would be a class library, and this would be really Lombic demo theme, for example. And we'd want to place that within the orchard.cms.web themes folder. And you can see that that would place that in here, if you can see that. And within the main web project within here, there's our demo theme and the one that I created earlier. So this is our main web project, which we'll be doing a lot of work in, but most of it will be done in this theme here, the Harvest theme. So this theme really just has a theme manifest, which just has some blurb in there, which I think we don't currently use. We have a project JSON, and this has just got some dependencies in there, so we can use these things within our Razor pages. We have Lucene for our search, and we also have this thing called additional settings, and that's the module that I created to allow us to have that strap line for the site settings. So it allows us to add that in, which I'll show you in a second. So what we first need to do is obviously create a layout for our theme, which I've prepared. And also within here we've got some assets. So these assets are the files that had literally just come from, zoom in so you can see this. Can everyone see that okay? Yeah. So these, who uses HTML5 shim? Again, a lot of these things we won't use, but these have just been downloaded directly from the theme site. We also have some Sass. Now this actually doesn't have any Sass in it. It's just some inline CSS that they had in their site. So I've just actually put that in there just to show you that you can overwrite or add additional styles to what was already in the theme itself. And this is their main theme file. So again, they've done this as standard CSS as opposed to less or Sass or anything like that. And this is just one massive long CSS file that we'll include. Within the views, we have our view imports, which just shows registers some tag helpers again, so we can use those within our theme, and our layout itself. So the layout is using ASP.NET-Core inject directive to do dependency injection to get the iSite service. So this allows us to get our site settings, which gives us our site name, so we can put that in the title of the page. And we have a few different scripts here, and I obviously don't condone this, but I'm trying to show different ways of being able to include scripts on the page. We have jQuery, which is using a tag helper that is using a named resource. So this is built in. We're saying we want the jQuery library which is, we've not specified a version here, but it will get the latest version by default. And we're using a CDN. And we want to place it in the foot of the page. So what that means is that we have these resource tag helpers here, and we have one for the foot at the bottom. So anything that says at foot will get put into this placeholder here. So that's using that. We also have this masonry JavaScript file that we're just linking out to some random site and pulling that in. But again, we're using the at foot to put that into the footer. So we can have a combination of using named resources as well as the injecting into the footer. We also have our blog.js, which we'll build in a second using Gulp. And we also have our blog CSS. So these are local files. We're also using Font Awesome here as another named resource, and using the CDN there. Some fonts from Google, which is just Open Sans font. And then we have our main master page, I guess, of the site, which just has a wrapper with some classes from the theme, and our menu, which I'll talk a little bit about later on. But this is again a content type tag helper, and it's rendering this main menu content item for us. So it's quite neat. We can also add it to the cache, which what these additional properties give us, and this is saying put this in a cache for 5 minutes. We're then rendering the body, and that's pretty much it. So I'm just going to quickly build that. And the assets that we need to pull into here, so the blog and the blog.js and the blog.css, are orchestrated by this assets.json file, which essentially is what Gulp picks up and looks through this file, anything that's listed in here. So you can see the main CSS and the additional blog SAS file that we've specified gets combined and put into the blog CSS file, which we're then referencing in the layout. Likewise with the JavaScript, we have the search drop down, and we have the masonry stuff, which all gets put into the blog.js. Now we can run that using the command line, so we can look at the Gulp file here, and within the Gulp file we can see that there's a few things we can spot. So it caters for less, it caters for SAS, we've got some minification for CSS here, it understands TypeScript, which is great, minification of the JavaScript as well, and some other things to help it move around and rename things. But this file is something you can modify and change yourself. There's 3 tasks: there's a build, a rebuild, and a watch. So a watch is obviously if you change some of your CSS, it will automatically rebuild that. Rebuild is used if you change your assets.json file, and obviously build is one of those things. And this file can, as I say, we can change. We can also use things like ES6 syntax in here, so we can use sort of like arrow functions. We can use lets and const, for example. So yeah, it's there to help you do your theming the way you want to do it. You don't have to have this, you can do something totally different, but this actually works quite well. And what it does is, if we just look through here, it looks for all the asset.json files within modules and themes and parses them. You can also use the Task Runner Explorer, which is built into Visual Studio I think now, but if not, it's an additional plugin, and we can run that build command from here. And you can see that that's built. And when that's built, we now have a content folder, which has our blog.js and our blog.css. So these are the files that we'll reference within our layout. So what we need to do now is tell Orchard that we want to use our new theme. So this is the theme that comes with the blog recipe out the box. This is the clean blog theme. It's freely downloadable. online, and the only difference here is I've put some more topical content in there for the conference. And we have a about page. It's because I just did a build, which looks something like that, and obviously the different blog posts in there. So logging into the admin, this is what we get. And we want to go into themes, and we want to go into active themes. And you can see here our active theme is the blog theme, so we want to change that to become harvest theme and submit. So now we've got our new harvest theme. If we refresh this, it will break. And it's looking for a layout file. So even though we've got a layout file, it can't find it. It doesn't know about it. And what we need to do now, oh, there you go. Sorry?
And use the control plus instead of the dynamic view because we want it to be.
Yeah, like that. Yeah, that's fine. So what we need to do now is tell the framework about our module. Now, Anton is working on this. I think Sitka might also be chipping in. So this isn't in the UI currently, so what we need to do is go into the database and just manually update this. So if we look at some of this content, we can see that our current theme has actually been updated to harvest theme, but that harvest theme isn't in the feature list. So if we go into here, we can see that we have a blog theme, and we'll just replicate that and list our harvest theme. And I'll copy that back in and update it. And then we also then need to enable that feature. So again, we'll copy and paste the blog theme one. And then enable our new theme. And I'll just update the database directly like that. So if now we go into here, I think we might need to do a rebuild.
Could you explain why you got to that?
Why we have to do that? It's because there's no UI for it. Yeah. Obviously it will become a lot easier when there's a UI. Temporary measure. And so we now have our new theme. It's not very pretty, but you can see that it's taken effect. And if we view the source of this, I'll get my mouse working, we can see that our scripts and our CSS that we referenced is in the foot. Here we can see that jQuery is being pulled from Google CDN. We have our external masonry file, and we also have our local file there. Okay, next we need to add our header. And to do that, we need to enable our module for our additional site setting. So within design, if I can get to it, within modules, we have a small module here called additional site settings, which I'm going to enable. And I'll show you the code in a second, but essentially what this does is gives us a little additional setting just to put our subtitle in of our site. So I'll go into the code for that, quickly show you the code for that. it's just inheriting here from site settings section display driver, and we're creating a new additional settings section. And in the database, you'll see that how that manifests itself. Yeah. Where's that? Hang on, I need to recreate the database. Hang on a second. So we can see that that just gets appended within the site settings for us. Okay, so we now need to create a site-wide header, and what we'll do for that is we'll create a widget. So we're going to create a new content type, and this will be a spotlight. And within there, we just want to add a text field for our image. And we'll call that spotlight image URL. And because there's no media center at the moment, then all of these images are going to be linked remotely. And because it's a widget, we want to give it a stereotype of widget. And that allows us to be able to pull that through into the layers. So at the moment, we have one layer called content. So what we need to do is add another one called header. So within settings, layers, we can add to this list a header zone. So in here now, we can see that we can target that header zone with widgets. We also have layers on the right hand side. So where do these widgets get placed and where do they get shown? So we have an always, which means always show, and we also have one just to show on the home page. For our purposes, we want to use always. Create a new spotlight. Let's call this main spotlight. We want it to use the always layer rule, and we'll just point it to an image. And just copy some files across now to bring that in. So just copied some files. So if you're not aware when you're theming Orchard, what you tend to do is overwrite shapes and use templates to be able to sort of overwrite and change the content markup of those. It's not the only way, but it's the predominant way that you tend to do it. So within the layout, we've now got this new line here, which is essentially created a new shape called heading using the new syntax, and we're passing in the site settings and our additional site settings. Now those additional site settings are here, so we are just casting the site settings to additional settings, and that allows us to get that extra strap line that we created earlier. And we're passing that into a heading, and that heading shape is here. So again, it's just another file. And you can see it's got some markup from the theme, and we are rendering our subtitle, which is our strap line, and our site name. We also have this here and this here. So render section async is how we define zones in our theme. So here we're defining a header zone and a post header zone. So that post header would be for our blog posts, where we have our breadcrumb and our post header, our post title, and this header here is where we want to put our spotlight widget that we've just created. So we're injecting it into that zone. We also have a widget spotlight override alternative here, and again, this is just adding some additional markup that the theme requires to show this image. So if we build, We now have our header. We have our link back to that home page here, and we also have our strap line, which is coming from our site settings module. So that looks looking all great. Now let's tackle the menu. So I'm just going to copy some files across, saving you watching me type all this out. To views. And what we've done here is added a few different overrides. We have a menu item, and a menu item link. There's very little changed, again just adding a few styles, a few CSS classes. Within the layout file, that hasn't changed. Within our heading file though, it has. So we now have this. So this essentially is another tag helper, and it's a shape tag helper, so it's saying render the navigation shape, which is another way of just doing this. But it's a lot more decorative, it's a lot more semantic, and people can understand what you're trying to achieve. So this essentially is rendering this navigation shape here. And within here we have our menu that was in the layout originally. And we also have the search icon and some things for like the mobile menu as well in there. We also have the search shape, and again this is just a way of componentizing and grouping together logical areas of your site. This is something we didn't want to be content managed, it's just a form, but we know that it gets reused in the navigation but also in the footer. And this is just targeting the index action of the search controller of the Lucene module, and that's where it's going to do the post or the get, shall we say. So if we was to just do a build here, and refresh, we now have our menu. So we have our home and we have our about, which goes to our about page. And we also have our search. And if we do a search, nothing's going to happen because there's no search page defined, so we need to do that next. So to do search, we first go into Lucene indexes and we create an index. So by convention, it's looking for search, but that can be overwritten. And we also need to tell the search what things to index. So here we are telling it to index the title and the body of the content items. So let's update that. And then what we'll do is just rebuild those indexes. So if we was to search for, say, Liberty, we now get our search page, which doesn't look very pretty, but you can see that Statue of Liberty content post has come through. But we don't really want this search box here, so let's override the search page. And again, this is just taking what you will find in the Lucene module. It's just taking that index page there and not locking my screen. And essentially overwriting and commenting out that search form at the top. So I've just commented that out. So just refreshing that. And that goes. What we need to do now is style the content, this bit here. So I'm just going to again copy some files across. Here we are overriding the content -blog, the content blog post summary, which is each individual blog post, and then the list part, which I'll go through in a second. So the content blog, again, just took some additional HTML out of there, and that's quite clean. We are removing the body part here. The blog post summary, again, it's just some HTML content that's wrapping the properties of that. You can see here we've got the title. We're also looking for the image URL here, and if that doesn't exist, use a default one. And it's as simple as that, really. On the list part, we are essentially got this nice little bit of code here, which is another tag helper, but it allows us to actually target a zone from another content item. So here we are targeting the paging zone, which we haven't yet created, but we'll put that into the layout shortly. And what we're essentially doing is saying, render the pager, not here, but somewhere else in the paging zone, which is quite clever. And we're overriding the paging things using this pager ID of blog. So it allows us to create some alternates there. If I was just to quickly build that and show you those overrides. Now we have our list the way it's meant to be. It's using the masonry flow behavior as well, because that's just hooking up using the CSS. But we haven't got any paging, so we need to add the paging. At the moment we've only got 4 posts, so we need to sort of change that to simulate, more posts. So what we can do is within the blog settings and in the list part, we can specify our page size to be, let's say, 3. Now what that also does, which may not be the case for the future, it also modifies the admin paging size as well. So here you can see we have now pagination in the admin. So for the paging, again, we just need to overwrite a couple of different shapes. In here we are overriding the pager next, and again we're just adding some divs around this and converting essentially what was originally a list, again, which is probably semantically correct, versus the theme is expecting it to be a div. So we've had to override these. And likewise with the previous one. And then the layout, we've added this here, which is now creating our paging zone. So this is what we're injecting the pager into. And if we was to do a build of the project, not the theme. Come on. Build file. Yeah. might be because, yeah. While that's doing that, anyone got any questions so far? Is it all making sense? While that's rebuilding the whole solution.
Steve, what's your biggest pain points around this so far?
I think, well, it's very similar to Orchard 1 in terms of the overrides. I think it can get quite, as you can see by the list already, you know, we've got quite a number of overrides. I think that's a common pattern that you see with theming of Orchard sites and others, you know, like Drupal and things like that, is that you have quite a few alternates to get the styling that you want. I think there's very little I think you can do around that, except probably not have baked in styles and HTML as part of some of the shapes to start with. But you know, got to be open to solutions to that, I think. Right, so we're back, and now we have our paging. So we can go next page, we can see this one, and we can go previous page. So let's look at the footer. So with the footer we need to again create another shape. We'll call this site footer, because if we called it footer then it, you know, that's obviously a HTML tag. We don't want to get confusing with that, and we'll add that footer shape into our views. And the footer shape, the site footer shape, is essentially the whole of the footer at the bottom. We pull in our site settings, and that's for the copyright stuff at the bottom where we're using the site name. We have a year and we're linking to the Orchard site. We have our tag cloud, and what we've done here, just for simplicity, is link to the Lucene search, and passing in the tag name. We have the second zone here, which is our categories. So I'll just uncomment this, and this is essentially a menu that we need to create to list our categories. And then here we are creating a zone called footer third, where we can inject widgets and so forth into that. So let's just go in and create our load that back up. And what we want to do is create a new menu for our categories. A lot of people only use menus for the primary navigation, but anything that's a list of something that isn't, you know, that you wouldn't want to use a projection or a taxonomy for, they're actually quite useful. So a lot of footer menus and things like that are quite useful. So we're going to call this categories and give it an alias of categories and create a menu item for it. Statue of Liberty, and we can link that to the search page, passing in the query of Liberty. And do the same for Central Park. And then publish that menu. If we then I think I might need to do a build. Oh no. So here we have our footer, and we can see we have our search that we're reusing. So I'll just show you that. Here, we're reusing this search shape that we created, which essentially just contains the form. We've got our tags. If you click on that, it will go to the search page. You can see that. Just passing the keyword through on the query string. And we also have our categories here, so you can see here we can do the same with the categories. Next is to do this section here, which is the widget, and this is just some HTML we're going to hard code into the widget. So we want to create a new content type, and this is going to be of type HTML widget. Obviously it can be called anything. It's really hard when it's zoomed in though. And we want to give this a body and a title.
Is there already an HTML widget?
Yeah, as part of the blog recipe there is. I've actually taken it out just to show how it would work to add one in. So, and we want to give that a stereotype of widget so it appears in our layers. We want to add the footer third zone, so again that appears in our layers section, which is here. And then we want to create our new HTML widget we've just created. We'll call this recent posts footer widget, why not? And we will just copy some HTML in. Which is essentially just some images and some text, simulating what you would do for a projection. Give it a title. And we will copy over the override for the HTML widget, which essentially wraps the H3 into a div. Again, for the theme purposes, that's how it expects the markup to be. So if we was to refresh that now, we can see our recent blog posts. I'm going to click on one of these. And it brings to our blog post, which we now need to theme as well. So this doesn't take much really, we just again need to put the container in place. So let's quickly look at doing that. We have a breadcrumbs and we have the content blog post. So within the content blog post override, we can see that we are targeting the post header zone, and we're passing in that content item. And we're passing in the breadcrumbs into that zone. So we have the information here for the breadcrumbs, but the zone is somewhere else. Here, in our header. And then our breadcrumbs is, again, simple. It's a little bit hard-coded, but it essentially puts in the title to show you that. If we just quickly build that. You can see now we have our blog post and we have our recent post here. So what we can do now for the recent post is create another menu. Again, another way of doing something. It's probably what you wouldn't do, you'd probably use a projection. But we can create a new menu. Call it recent blog posts. Create a few links. And you can see from the override here, we're actually referencing this recent posts menu item on the second side of the page. So if we was to refresh this now, we should see our menu appear, which links to the different posts. Finally, we have our About page, which again requires a similar setup, where we just need to give it the HTML that we need. We also have got the orchard.users login, which again we just add this wrapper around that to make it fit with the theme. We click on the About, wait for it to build. And there we have our About page that uses the same post header as the post. Got breadcrumbs. And if we log out, try and log back in, we also have our login page also styled. And that's essentially the theming of the site. There is one more thing that I wanted to cover off, and it's around sort of more advanced techniques around sort of single page applications, for example. And if you were to attempt, which I think Daniel's got a great talk later on about spars. If you were to try and attempt that, and what you'd probably do is look at using something like Webpack, which allows you to chunk your files. So you tend to have a common, which is all of the sort of the common files for your JavaScript, and bundle all that into one, and then for each component have its own JavaScript, and lazy load that on demand. And what Webpack allows you to do is that chunking really easily. It also has things like tree shaking, so it takes a redundant code out and things like that. So here's a little example of how that would work, and it is a little example. So we have a little, I'm just going to copy these into the views. I'll show you these in a sec. And we have our client app here, which is our Angular 2 app. And within here, I'll zoom in a second. Within here we have just a simple main, and we have a little app here, which is a little app component, and it's using TypeScript, and it's got a CSS file. That CSS file actually is a post CSS file. I'm not sure how many people use post CSS, but you probably used it in one way or another using auto prefixer, for example. There's a lot of movement to just using post CSS because you can mimic Sass and less, create your own plugins and things like that. But one of the big advantages is you can use the next version of CSS syntax, things like var and cool color functions like this. So this is the next version of CSS. So it allows you to use this now, ready for when it becomes widely available. And there's only one dependency, so rather than having dependencies on libsass or less and things like that, it's just one dependency on post CSS. And it's meant to be quite quick as well. It's meant to be a lot quicker than the others. So we have that in place. What I'm going to do is just quickly build, do a webpack.config and so essentially build all the vendor stuff. Now in here, I'm just going to add these files. And we have a couple of Webpack files. We have a TypeScript file. I'll zoom in a second. So we have a couple of web configs. So this one's for all the Angular stuff. This one is essentially for our little app that builds that. We have a TypeScript config, just tells us how we want TypeScript to work. We also have our post CSS config. just look at the post CSS config, you can see here we're just using the CSS Next stuff. So that's basically saying use the latest features of CSS Next. But there's other stuff you can just plug in here. And just looking at that CSS, you can see we have some roots, and this is where we declare our variables. We have the host, which is the Angular component itself. We can also see we've got some nesting going on here with BEM syntax for the newsletter sign up, which is what essentially the app does. It just renders a little form, which I can show you here. It's little newsletter sign up form, and it just presents a little thank you when you've done that. It's quite a simple example. Nope. That needs to run. Hello? Okay, let's run in. Now, one of the things ASP.NET Core allows you to do, obviously with Orchard Core running on ASP.NET Core, there's a lot of ASP.NET Core goodies, and there's something called JavaScript Services. Has anyone heard of this before? Okay, so Steve Sanderson is the main guy behind this, and essentially it's broken into a few different packages. So we have Node services, Sparse services, and Angular services. So essentially what it does, each one builds upon itself. So Node services is very powerful. It essentially allows you to call Node from your ASP.NET Core application. Steve Sanderson has a great talk where he takes a package from NPM which resizes images, dynamically resizes images on the fly, and calls it from the ASP.NET Core application. So he's using how many million NPM packages out there, and using it from your .NET Core, which is great. Sparse Services has an extra level of functionality which targets things like React and Angular 2. And there's a specific one for Angular services which is around prime caching, and this allows you to do like universal Angular, so it allows you to do pre-rendering on the server as well. And there's some tag helpers in there that allows you to do that. It's really powerful stuff, so I encourage you to have a look at that. One of the big things of Sparse services is something called Webpack middleware. So with Webpack, there's some middleware that would normally run on a Node environment, but here we can use it with ASP.NET Core. And part of that is a hot module replacement, which is like a live reload, which I'll give you a demo of now. So I've just built those, and I'm just going to refresh. Oops, didn't want to do that. And we have our clients app here in Visual Studio Code. So I'm just going to open up the CSS. Can't zoom on this for some reason. And hopefully we have our component showing. So this is the Angular 2 component. If I was to type something in, we get this come back, and there's some funky two-way binding going on as well. But what we need to do is now enable this module that allows us to use this Webpack middleware. So within here, I've created a little module that actually just wraps the Sparse services at what Steve Sanderson wrote. I'm just going to enable that. Okay. If we was to refresh, we now see oh, I've cleared it now. Let's refresh again. We now see this here. Zoom in. HMR, which is the hot module reload, and that's connected. So if we was to go in and change this from black to red, I know you can't see it, but it's going to change that colour. Straight away, that's now gone red. You can see, just by looking at this, that the HTML was connected. It recognised that I'd made a change to a CSS file, or in this case, a post CSS file. It's rebuilt it. It's looking at all the things that's changed, and you can see that the app component CSS has changed, and it's running it through the post CSS loader of Webpack. It also then traverses the dependency graph and look at all the other things that might have changed, and does a rebuild, and then injects that markup into the page without refreshing the page. So if we was to, let's say, change that back to, or change it to green or something. There we go. You see here, look, bundle rebuilding.
How is this different to, is it browser link? Browser link do something similar to this?
So that so the hot reloading of things, or the live reload, or browser sync, and those types of technologies. They work with things like SignalR and types of technology, real-time, Socket.io types of technologies. This is actually middleware, so this is actually running on your server, in your dev environment on your server, and is part of the pipeline. So one of the benefits of this is if you're not a front-end guy, or you're not technically Gulp savvy, you don't need to worry about it. It just happens. You don't have to remember to run build or set your watch. It does it automatically as part of to switching the module on, I guess. I'm not saying not to use Gulp, because Gulp and Grunt is great, but I think if you was to target more of sort of like a spa environment, especially the new React and Angular 2, then Webpack is deemed the best practice because of the additional features that it brings in terms of the chunking and the and sort of like the tree shaking capabilities that comes out of the box. So in addition to this, obviously there's a lot of stuff that I haven't shown, which is the server-side rendering of things and bridging between your server and your JavaScript code, which you can do as well. But I'm running out of time, so one thing I just did want to show is just the layout file once more, where we've added this in. So this is the vendor file that we've just built, and the main, and we're using this again as part of ASP.NET Core, is appending the version to the scripts. So again, this is something you'd normally do in Gulp or Webpack itself, which hashes the files, perfect for a CDN environment. But if we was to view the source of this, well, that's not done actually. It would append a version to it. I don't know why that hasn't, but it normally would append a version to our scripts, like a hash value. So that's it. Thank you. Any questions? I've either covered everything off, or you didn't understand a word I was saying, or a bit of both. But if you have any, come grab me afterwards. Thank you.